The rain fell in heavy sheets across the mansion's immaculate grounds, washing away the carefully planned perfection of what should have been the wedding of the year. Through the downpour, a lone figure in white stumbled along the empty road, the once pristine wedding gown now a sodden weight dragging behind her. Her makeup streaked down her face, indistinguishable from the rain or tears. She didn't know where she was going, only what she was running from. As headlights approached through the darkness, she faltered, her heel breaking as she collapsed onto the gravel shoulder. The truck slowed and a man leaned out, concern etched across his weathered face. Without hesitation, he draped his jacket over her trembling shoulders. "I won't ask any questions," he said simply, his voice barely audible above the storm. And in that moment, soaked to the bone and desperate for shelter from more than just the rain, she decided to trust him. The cabin sat nestled among towering pines at the edge of the lake, its weathered exterior betraying years of quiet resilience against the elements. Inside, the woman who had introduced herself only as Lila sat wrapped in a faded quilt, her elegant manicure a stark contrast against the worn fabric. The fire in the hearth cast dancing shadows across the modest living room as she clutched a mug of tea between her palms, steam rising like the secrets she wasn't ready to share. Caleb moved quietly around the kitchen, giving her the space that instinct told him she needed. He'd seen that look before, the hollow gaze of someone fleeing something they couldn't outrun. "You should rest," he said, nodding toward the small guest bedroom. "We can figure things out in the morning." The clock on the wall ticked past midnight, each second a reminder that her old life was slipping further away. Lila nodded but made no move to stand. The thought of closing her eyes terrified her. What if they found her while she slept? "I should go," she whispered, more to herself than to him. "I'm putting you at risk by being here." Her hands trembled slightly as she set down the mug and rose to her feet. The borrowed flannel shirt and sweatpants hung loosely on her frame, a far cry from the couture that usually adorned her body. As she reached for the door handle, a small sound from the corner of the room stopped her. There, curled beneath a homemade Afghan with a tattered stuffed rabbit clutched to her chest, slept a little girl no more than 7 years old. Golden curls framed her peaceful face, illuminated by the soft glow of a nearby lantern. Lila's hand fell away from the door. "That's Emma," Caleb said softly, coming to stand beside her. "My daughter. I didn't want to wake her when we came in. She falls asleep waiting for me sometimes on late shifts." Lila felt something twist inside her chest, a recognition of innocence she'd forgotten existed in the world. "I didn't realize you had a child," she murmured, suddenly self-conscious about the intrusion she represented. Caleb gently lifted Emma from the armchair, cradling her against his chest with practiced ease. "It's just the two of us," he explained, his voice low as he carried her toward a bedroom down the narrow hallway. When he returned, he found Lila still standing by the door, but the desperate urgency had faded from her posture. They sat in silence for a while, the crackling fire filling the space between them. Finally, Caleb spoke. "Lost my wife 3 years ago. Cancer. Emma was barely 4, too young to understand why her mom couldn't come home from the hospital." His fingers absently traced the worn leather of the armrest. "I used to work in private security. Good money, but the hours were killing me. After Sarah died, I couldn't justify being away from Emma that much. So now I fix boat engines at the marina. It's enough." The simple sincerity of his words hung in the air. No pretense, no agenda. Just the unvarnished truth of a life recalibrated by loss. Lila studied his face, the fine lines around his eyes speaking of both grief and moments of joy found in its wake. "If I told you I just ran away from a $4 million wedding," she said finally, her voice barely above a whisper, "would you think I was crazy?" Caleb's expression didn't change. He gazed into the fire, the flames reflecting in his eyes. "I watched the woman I loved fight cancer with a smile on her face, pretending everything would be okay even when we both knew it wouldn't." He turned to look at her. Everyone has their reasons for running. Sometimes staying would be the crazier choice. Lila felt something loosen in her chest, a knot of tension she hadn't realized she'd been carrying. For the first time in years, she was speaking to someone who didn't want anything from her. No connections, no favors, no strategic alliance disguised as affection. It wasn't his words that created the fragile trust blooming between them, but rather what he didn't say, the questions he didn't ask, the judgments he withheld. "Thank you," she said simply. "For the tea, for not asking." Caleb nodded, understanding passing between them like a current. "Get some sleep, Lila. Whatever you're running from, it'll still be there in the morning. But maybe in the daylight, it won't seem quite so impossible." As she finally retreated to the small guest room with its patchwork quilt and faded curtains, Lila realized it was the first genuine advice she'd received in longer than she could remember. Tomorrow would come with its complications, but for tonight, in this simple cabin, with its honest inhabitants, she allowed herself to breathe. Morning came with a gentle persistence, sunlight filtering through pine branches to dapple the cabin's wooden floors. Lila woke, disoriented, the unfamiliar surroundings momentarily confusing until the events of the previous night crashed back into her consciousness. The borrowed clothes, the stranger's kindness, the desperate flight through the rain. It hadn't been a dream. She sat up slowly, running her fingers through tangled hair that yesterday had been styled by Manhattan's most sought-after stylists. The scent of coffee and something sweet pulled her from the bedroom. In the kitchen, she found Emma perched on a stool at the counter, small legs swinging as she concentrated on pouring batter into a pan. Caleb stood nearby, watchful but allowing his daughter the independence she clearly cherished. "You have to wait until you see the little bubbles before you flip it," Emma was explaining seriously to herself, spatula poised and ready. When she spotted Lila, her eyes widened with curiosity. "Oh, you're the lady from last night. Dad said you needed a place to stay because of the storm. Do you like blueberry pancakes? I put in extra because they're the best kind." The child's unguarded welcome brought an unexpected smile to Lila's face. "I love blueberry pancakes. Thank you for making them." Caleb handed her a steaming mug of coffee. "Hope you slept okay," he said, his tone casual but his eyes searching her face, assessing her state after the night's drama. Before she could respond, his attention shifted to something outside the window. A frown creased his brow as he reached for the newspaper that had been delivered to the porch. He scanned the front page, and Lila watched as recognition dawned in his expression. Without a word, he placed the paper on the counter, turning it so she could see. The headline screamed in bold type, "Stratmore CEO vanishes from own wedding." Beneath it, a photo of Lila in business attire from a recent economic forum, her expression confident and composed, the perfect corporate leader. The smaller caption read, "Billion-dollar merger in question as Elizabeth Stratmore disappears during ceremony to industrial heir James Harrington." Lila felt the blood drain from her face. She snatched the paper, eyes darting across the article that detailed her mysterious disappearance and speculated about mental health issues, cold feet, or possible foul play. The words blurred as panic rose in her throat. "You knew?" she demanded, looking up at Caleb with accusation burning in her eyes. "Did you know who I was last night?" Caleb shook his head, genuine surprise evident in his expression. "No. I don't follow business news much. I had no idea you were..." He glanced at the paper. "Elizabeth Stratmore? You said your name was Lila?" "It's my middle name," she said automatically, still clutching the newspaper so tightly her knuckles whitened. "I can't believe this. They're making it sound like I had some kind of breakdown." Her voice rose with indignation. "The merger? That's what they're worried about? Not the fact that I discovered my fiancé was only marrying me for controlling interest in my company?" Emma had stopped her pancake ministrations, sensing the sudden tension in the room. "Dad?" she questioned uncertainly. Caleb placed a reassuring hand on his daughter's shoulder. "It's okay, Em. Why don't you go get dressed while I talk with our guest?" Once Emma had reluctantly left the kitchen, he turned back to Lila. "I'm sorry about the newspaper, but nothing has changed from last night. You're still welcome here until you figure things out." But something had changed. Lila could feel it. The wall of her real identity now standing between them. The simplicity of being just a woman in distress had vanished, replaced by the complicated reality of who she actually was. A CEO, an heiress, a woman whose life decisions made front-page news. "I should go," she said, pushing away from the counter. "I've already imposed enough. I'll call a car service and be out of your way. Caleb watched her, his expression unreadable. Running again? He asked quietly. Seems like that's what got you here in the first place. The words stopped her cold. You have no idea what my life is like, she said, anger flaring. The people I deal with, they'll track me down eventually, and when they do, you don't want to be involved. Trust me. Maybe not, he conceded, but Emma made pancakes for 3, and there's no reason to leave hungry just because some newspaper printed your real name. As if summoned by mention of her name, Emma reappeared in the doorway, now dressed in overalls, with mismatched socks. Are you leaving? She asked Lila, disappointment evident in her small voice. But we were going to make cookies today. Dad said we could use the special vanilla. Lila felt herself caught between worlds. The high-stakes corporate battlefield she'd fled, and this simple domestic scene that offered an unexpected respite. The genuine disappointment in the child's eyes somehow weighed more than the expectations of board members and shareholders. She began, then faltered. The absurdity of the situation suddenly struck her. Elizabeth Stratmore, named among the 50 most powerful women in business last year, rendered speechless by a 7-year-old's invitation to bake cookies. Home breakfast, she finally conceded, lowering herself back onto the stool, and maybe cookies. Then I really do need to figure out my next steps. The relief on Emma's face was immediate and luminous as she scrambled back to her pancake station. Caleb said nothing, but the subtle nod he gave Lila conveyed understanding. The newspaper lay forgotten on the counter as the strange trio settled into a breakfast that none of them could have anticipated 24 hours earlier. The delicate truce established over breakfast shattered 3 days later. Lila had settled into an uneasy routine at the cabin, sleeping in the guest room, helping with meals, and spending hours with Emma, whose unfiltered enthusiasm provided a welcome distraction from the chaos she'd left behind. She'd made discreet calls to her most trusted assistant, arranging for access to emergency funds and monitoring the fallout from her abrupt departure. But she'd told herself, and Caleb, that she needed just a few more days of anonymity before facing the storm. That illusion of control collapsed on a rain-soaked Thursday afternoon. Emma was teaching Lila how to play an elaborate card game of her own invention when the crunch of tires on gravel cut through the patter of raindrops on the roof. Caleb, who had been repairing a boat motor on the covered porch, came inside quickly, his expression grim. Black SUV, he said simply. 2 men. They don't look like locals. Lila's stomach clenched as she rose from the table. She'd been naive to think she could hide here for even this long. I'll handle this, she said, moving toward the door. It's probably James's security team. They won't make a scene if I agree to go with them. Caleb blocked her path, his posture shifting subtly into something more alert, more defensive. Are you in danger from these people? Not physically, she replied, though uncertainty flickered across her face. James wouldn't... She stopped, reconsidering. I don't know anymore. His family has a lot invested in the merger that my disappearance jeopardized. Before Caleb could respond, heavy knocks rattled the wooden door. Emma pressed herself against her father's side, suddenly frightened by the tension filling the small cabin. Miss Stratmore, a deep voice called from outside. We know you're in there. Mr. Harrington is concerned for your well-being and has sent us to escort you back to New York. Lila closed her eyes briefly, steeling herself. When she opened them, the vulnerable woman of the past few days had vanished, replaced by the composed executive accustomed to navigating hostile takeovers and boardroom power plays. Let me handle this, she repeated to Caleb, her voice low but firm. She opened the door to find 2 men in dark suits standing on the porch, rain dripping from their expensive outerwear. The larger of the 2 stepped forward, his expression a practiced mask of professional concern. Mrs. Stratmore, I'm Davis, head of security for the Harrington family. We've been very worried about your sudden disappearance. Mr. Harrington has asked that we bring you back immediately to address some urgent matters regarding the company merger. I'm not going anywhere with you, Lila stated flatly. Please inform James that I'm perfectly safe and will be in touch with my legal team shortly regarding the dissolution of our engagement and any pending business arrangements. The security guard's polite facade slipped slightly. I'm afraid I must insist, Ms. Stratmore. We have documentation here. He produced a folder from inside his jacket. that authorizes us to secure your safety and return you to New York. Your father signed off on it, concerned about your mental state." Lila felt her blood run cold. "My father has no legal authority over me. I'm 34 years old. Nevertheless," the man continued, "we also have papers regarding the temporary hold on your assets pending a full investigation. This property," he gestured to the cabin, "appears to be leased under your corporate account, which falls under those restrictions." Behind her, Lila heard Caleb's sharp intake of breath. She hadn't told him the cabin rental company was a subsidiary of one of her investment properties. She hadn't thought it mattered. "That's enough," Caleb stepped forward, positioning himself slightly in front of Lila. "This is private property and you're not welcome here. Miss Stratmore has made her position clear." The second guard moved forward, his hand shifting toward what Lila realized with horror might be a concealed weapon. "Sir, this doesn't concern you. We're here on legitimate business." "My daughter is inside," Caleb said, his voice dangerously quiet. "So yes, it absolutely concerns me." The tension escalated as Davis made a grab for Lila's arm. Caleb reacted instantly, blocking the movement and pushing the larger man back. The second guard lunged forward, shoving Caleb hard enough that he stumbled backward, losing his footing on the wet porch and falling heavily against the railing. Something snapped in Lila at the sight of Caleb struggling to regain his balance. Without thinking, she positioned herself between the guards and the cabin door, where Emma's frightened face was now visible through the window. "Touch them again," she said, her voice vibrating with a cold fury that had made corporate rivals quake. "And you're touching me. And believe me when I say that the Harrington family does not want the publicity of assaulting a woman who already fled their son's wedding." She held out her hand. "Give me those papers." When Davis hesitated, she narrowed her eyes. "Now, or the next call I make will be to every financial reporter in my contact list, detailing exactly how the Harrington family conducts business." The men exchanged glances before reluctantly handing over the folder. Lila scanned the contents quickly, her expression darkening. Without hesitation, she pulled a pen from her pocket and signed several of the documents with decisive strokes. "There," she said, thrusting the papers back at them. "I've signed the release forfeiting my claim to any joint assets established during our engagement. In exchange, you will leave immediately and ensure that this property and its occupants remain untouched by either the Harrington family or my father's interests." She stepped closer, her voice dropping. "And you tell James that if he ever sends people after me again, everything I know about his family's business practices goes public. Are we clear?" The men retreated, their mission partially accomplished but their authority thoroughly undermined. As the black SUV pulled away, the adrenaline that had sustained Lila suddenly evaporated. She turned to find Caleb watching her with an unreadable expression, one hand rubbing his shoulder where he'd hit the railing. The storm outside had intensified, rain lashing against the windows as thunder rumbled across the lake. But the real tempest was brewing inside, as Caleb checked that Emma was okay before closing the cabin door. "You didn't mention the cabin was connected to you," he said quietly, once Emma had retreated to her room with a book. "I didn't think it mattered," Lila replied, suddenly exhausted. "It's just one of dozens of properties under a holding company. I didn't even make the connection until they mentioned it." Caleb shook his head, running a hand through his hair. "They found you here, Lila, or Elizabeth, or whoever you are. They found you, and they brought legal paperwork and men who carry guns to enforce it." His voice remained low, but the intensity behind his words was unmistakable. "My daughter lives here. I can't have people like that showing up at our door." The unspoken accusation hung between them. "You brought this danger into our lives." Lila felt the weight of it pressing against her chest, making it difficult to breathe. "I'm sorry," she said, the words feeling wholly inadequate. "I never meant for any of this to touch you or Emma. I thought I could just disappear for a while." "People like you don't get to disappear," Caleb replied. No judgment in his tone, just a simple statement of fact. "Your life is too big, too connected to too many other lives." Lila sank onto the couch, suddenly overwhelmed by the truth of his words. "I thought I could live quietly, just for a little while," she whispered. "But now you and Emma have been dragged into my mess." Outside, a branch cracked under the storm's assault, slapping against the window like an exclamation point to her words. The cabin itself, which had seemed so solid and safe just hours before, now felt vulnerable to forces beyond its sturdy walls. Caleb's expression softened slightly as he looked at her. "You stood between those men and my daughter," he acknowledged. "That counts for something." Page Red Weather celebrates the first female headliner. "It's the least I could do after bringing this to your doorstep," Lila replied. She gazed around the small living room that had become an unexpected sanctuary. "What will you do now?" Caleb was quiet for a long moment, the only sound the rhythmic drumming of rain on the roof. "I think it's time Emma and I moved on," he finally said. "This place, it has too many memories anyway. Sarah loved it here. Maybe it's time for a fresh start somewhere new." "Because of me," Lila said, the realization settling heavily between them. "Because I won't have Emma caught in adult problems she didn't create," he corrected gently. "She's already lost too much in her short life. I won't risk her feeling unsafe in her own home." The finality in his voice told Lila everything she needed to know. Whatever fragile connection had formed between them over these brief days, the shared meals, the quiet conversations by the fire after Emma had gone to bed, the tentative understanding that had begun to blossom, it was ending before it had truly begun. "I understand," she said, rising to her feet. "I'll be gone by morning. I can arrange for a car service without involving anyone connected to James or my father." Caleb didn't argue, and somehow his acceptance hurt more than any protest would have. They had both recognized the fundamental truth. Their worlds were too different, the collision too disruptive to sustain. As Lila packed the few belongings she'd accumulated during her brief stay, she paused at the small drawing Emma had given her just that morning, a crayon rendering of 3 figures standing beside a blue lake, the smallest one holding hands with both of the taller ones. Beneath it, in careful child's handwriting, "My dad, me, and Lila at our lake." She folded the paper carefully and tucked it into her bag, a reminder of 3 days when she had almost believed in the possibility of a simpler life. 2 months passed like ships in the night, carrying Lila and Caleb in opposite directions across unseen currents. True to his word, Caleb had relocated with Emma to a coastal town 50 miles north, where a former security colleague had offered him work at a larger marina. The cabin by the lake stood empty, its memories packed away, like the photographs of Sarah that still remained in boxes Caleb couldn't bring himself to open. For Lila, re-entry into her former life had been a calculated exercise in damage control. She had emerged from hiding with a carefully crafted narrative about needing time to reconsider the merger that her marriage to James would have cemented. The business world had buzzed with speculation, dubbing her the runaway CEO bride, and countless think pieces about women in leadership. But Lila had weathered worse storms in her climb to the top, and her company remained stable under her decisive leadership. Yet something had shifted inside her. In board meetings and investor calls, she found herself increasingly impatient with the political maneuvering and status signaling that had once seemed a natural part of her world. At charity galas and industry dinners, the conversations felt hollow, the connections transactional in ways she could no longer ignore. On a rainy Tuesday evening, Lila stood at the podium of a women's leadership conference, delivering a keynote about resilience in business. The audience of aspiring executives hung on her every polished word, their admiration palpable. But as applause washed over her, Lila felt a profound emptiness. The successful CEO addressing the crowd seemed like a character she was playing rather than herself. Her thoughts drifted to Emma's uninhibited laughter as they had built sandcastles by the lake, to Caleb's quiet strength as he taught his daughter to bait a fishing hook. Those moments had contained more authenticity than anything she'd experienced in the months since her return. Across the miles, in a small apartment above a boat repair shop, Emma sat at a child-sized desk, her tongue caught between her teeth in concentration as she carefully formed letters on a sheet of notebook paper. Caleb watched from the doorway, his heart aching at the determined set of his daughter's shoulders, so like her mother's. "Is this how you spell friend, Dad?" Emma asked, holding up the paper for inspection. Caleb moved closer, noting the slightly crooked letters spelling out, "Dear Lila, are you still my friend? Dad gets sad when I talk about you." "That's right, Pumpkin," he said softly, his throat tightening. "But who are you writing to?" "Lila," Emma answered matter-of-factly. "I miss her cookies. And her stories. And she never said if we're still friends." Caleb had been careful not to discuss Leela in front of Emma, hoping his daughter's memory of their brief house guest would fade with time. Clearly, he had underestimated the impact those few days had made on his child. "Honey, we don't have Lila's address," he explained gently, "and she's very busy with her important job. Remember how we talked about that?" Emma's small face fell, but then brightened with the resilience of childhood. "Maybe we could mail it to the lake house, and then it could get forwarded?" Before Caleb could formulate a response that wouldn't crush his daughter's hopes, Emma had already sealed the letter in an envelope and was carefully printing Lila in large block letters across the front. He didn't have the heart to tell her that mail addressed so simply would never find its intended recipient. Yet through some alignment of fate, determination, and the kindness of a rural postal worker who remembered the fancy lady staying with the widower and his little girl, Emma's letter eventually made its way to Lila's office. It arrived on the same day Lila was scheduled to announce a major new direction for her company, a venture capital fund specifically targeting women-owned businesses in underserved communities. As her assistant laid out the day's correspondence, the childish handwriting on the small envelope immediately caught Lila's attention. She tore it open, her normally steady hands trembling slightly as she unfolded the simple note. The board members were already assembling in the conference room when Lila made an unprecedented decision. Without explanation, she canceled the meeting and instructed her assistant to book her on the next flight to the coastal region, where she believed Caleb and Emma had relocated. It took 3 days of discreet inquiries before she found them. The marina owner, initially suspicious of the elegant woman asking about his mechanic, finally relented when Lila explained that she simply wanted to return something important to the little girl. When she finally spotted Caleb on the dock, methodically cleaning boat parts in the late afternoon sun, Lila found herself frozen in place. He looked different somehow, more at ease in this setting than he had at the lake cabin, his movements confident and purposeful. Only when he straightened and turned, sensing her presence, did she see the familiar shadow of loss that still lingered in his eyes. Recognition washed over his face, followed by disbelief and something else she couldn't quite name. For a long moment they simply stood looking at each other across the weathered planks of the dock. Then, as if by mutual agreement, they moved to a bench overlooking the harbor. A light rain had begun to fall, not unlike the night they'd first met. "How did you find us?" Caleb asked finally, his voice neither welcoming nor hostile, simply curious. "Emma's letter," Lila replied, pulling the creased paper from her purse. "Apparently the postal service is more efficient than I gave it credit for." A small smile tugged at the corner of Caleb's mouth. "She'll be thrilled it reached you. She talks about you all the time. Her friend with the pretty dresses who makes the best chocolate chip cookies." "I had help with those," Lila admitted. "I'd never actually baked cookies before Emma showed me how." Silence settled between them, filled with unspoken questions and the gentle rhythm of raindrops on the harbor. "I thought you would hate me," Lila said finally, watching a seagull dive toward the water's surface. "For bringing chaos into your lives, for making you leave your home." Caleb shook his head slowly. "We needed a change anyway. Too many ghosts at the lake." He turned to face her directly. "Why are you here, Lila? Really?" The directness of his question caught her off guard, though it shouldn't have. Caleb had never been one for social niceties or corporate doublespeak. "I thought I wanted my old life back," she said honestly. "The company, the status, the control. And I got it all back, even stronger than before, actually. The board respects me more now that I've proven I won't be manipulated into a merger that wasn't in our best interests." She paused, gathering her thoughts. "But it feels hollow, empty, like I'm playing a part in someone else's story." Rain collected on Caleb's shoulders as he listened, making no move to seek shelter. "I keep thinking about those 3 days at the cabin," Lila continued, her voice softer now. "How real everything felt, how present I was, not planning the next move or calculating the risks and rewards of every interaction. Just living." "That's just regular life for most people," Caleb said, but there was no judgment in his tone. "Nothing special about pancakes and card games and fishing off the dock." They were special to me, Lila insisted. You and Emma. You showed me something I didn't know I was missing. Caleb's expression remained guarded. We're not a vacation from real life, Lila. This is who we are. Simple people with simple problems. No private jets or billion-dollar decisions. Just trying to make rent and hoping the school doesn't call because Emma put glue in someone's hair again. Lila couldn't help but smile at that. She's creative. She's a handful, Caleb corrected, but his eyes softened with obvious love for his daughter. I'm afraid, Lila admitted after another pause. Afraid you'll look at me someday and see all the ways I don't fit into your world, that you'll resent me for not being ordinary enough. Caleb studied her face, his expression thoughtful. And I've been afraid you'd realize I have nothing to offer someone like you. No connections, no fancy education, nothing that would impress the people in your world. The honesty of his admission broke something open between them, a recognition that beneath their external differences, they shared the same fundamental fears. Emma's been asking if we could visit the lake again, Caleb said finally. She misses feeding the ducks. I bought the cabin, Lila replied, the words tumbling out before she could reconsider. After you left. It felt wrong to let it go to strangers. Caleb's surprise was evident. Why? I don't know, she answered truthfully. Maybe I needed a place that reminded me of what matters. Or maybe I just wanted to keep the possibility open that someday. She didn't finish the thought, but she didn't need to. Understanding passed between them, fragile but real. Would you like to see Emma? Caleb asked. She gets out of school in about 20 minutes. She'll never forgive me if she finds out you were here and didn't say hello. Relief washed over Lila's face. I'd like that very much. As they walked together toward the elementary school, matching their pace in unconscious synchronicity, the rain lightened to a gentle mist. Neither made promises or declarations. It was too soon, the distance between their worlds still too vast to navigate with certainty. But as Emma burst through the school doors and spotted them waiting together, her face lighting up with pure joy, both Lila and Caleb recognized that some connections transcend the boundaries of circumstance. Emma raced toward them, her backpack bouncing wildly. You came back, she exclaimed, flinging herself at Lila with complete trust. Did you get my letter? Are we still friends? Lila knelt down, meeting the child at eye level. We will always be friends, she said firmly, holding Emma's small hands in her own. Because I don't want to be just a visitor in your life anymore. Over Emma's head, her eyes met Caleb's, a question and an offer in her gaze. The future remained unwritten, but for the first time in both their lives, the possibilities seemed limited, only by their courage to embrace them. 6 months later, a very different kind of gathering took place at a renovated community center in the heart of the coastal town. The Elizabeth Stratmore Foundation for Family Resilience was celebrating its official launch, with a focus on supporting single parents and survivors of coercive relationships. The modest building had been transformed for the evening, with simple but elegant decorations and a warmth that reflected the foundation's mission. Lila stood at the podium, dressed in a tailored suit that managed to bridge her corporate past and more relaxed present. The audience before her included local families, social workers, and a handful of business associates who had supported her vision for the foundation. When I left my wedding 7 months ago, she began, her voice steady and authentic. It wasn't just about escaping a bad relationship. It was about recognizing that I had built a life that looked impressive from the outside, but felt empty within. She paused, her gaze sweeping across the room. I was fortunate enough to find shelter, both physical and emotional, with people who showed me what real connection looks like, who taught me that sometimes the bravest thing we can do is allow ourselves to be seen as we truly are, not as others expect us to be. In the front row, Caleb watched with quiet pride, Emma nestled against his side. The past months had brought changes for all of them. Lila dividing her time between running her company remotely and building a life in the coastal community. Caleb expanding his work to include a boat tour business that utilized his knowledge of local waters. Emma blossoming with the stability of their unconventional family arrangement. This foundation isn't about charity, Lila continued. It's about creating pathways to independence and healing for those who have found themselves in situations where their autonomy and sense of self have been compromised. Because everyone deserves the chance to rewrite their story. As she spoke, Caleb reflected on how their own story had evolved. The cabin by the lake had become a weekend retreat for the three of them, a place where memories of both past and present coexisted in a delicate balance. His photographs of Sarah now hung alongside new images, Emma teaching Lila to skip stones across the water, the three of them building a treehouse together, quiet evenings watching fireflies from the dock. After the presentation, reporters and local officials gathered around Lila, eager to discuss the foundation's initiatives. She answered their questions with the same precision and confidence that had made her a formidable CEO, but there was a new quality to her interactions, a groundedness that came from knowing her worth extended beyond balance sheets and market shares. When the crowd finally thinned, a journalist from a national business magazine approached her. "Mr. Stratmore, there's been speculation about your personal life since your unconventional exit from the Harrington wedding. Would you care to comment on rumors that you've been splitting your time between Manhattan and this small coastal town?" Lila smiled, neither confirming nor denying. "My priority these days is building things that matter, both professionally and personally." "And what about marriage?" the reporter pressed. "Any plans to try again, perhaps with someone less connected to your corporate interests?" Before Lila could respond, Emma darted forward, slipping her small hand into Lila's with the easy confidence of a child who knows she belongs. Caleb followed at a more measured pace, his presence solid and reassuring as he came to stand beside them. "We don't need a piece of paper to know this is home," Lila said simply, the warmth in her eyes as she looked at Caleb and Emma conveying more than any formal announcement could have. Later that evening, as a gentle rain, so reminiscent of the night they first met, fell outside, the three of them walked hand in hand along the shore. Emma skipped ahead occasionally, collecting shells and reporting her findings with enthusiastic detail. "Do you ever regret it?" Caleb asked quietly. "Giving up the simplicity of your old life, the clarity of just being CEO Elizabeth Stratmore, without all this complexity?" Lila considered the question seriously, her gaze following Emma as the child balanced carefully on a piece of driftwood. "My life before wasn't simple," she finally answered. "It was isolated, controlled. I had one identity that consumed everything else." She turned to look at him directly. "This is more complicated, certainly, messy sometimes, but it's real in a way nothing else has ever been." Caleb nodded, understanding. They had both given up certainties for this uncharted territory between their worlds. He, the protective isolation he'd built around himself and Emma after Sarah's death. She, the singular focus on corporate success that had defined her for so long. "Emma wants a dog," he said, changing the subject, with the pragmatic pivot that was so characteristically him. Lila laughed, the sound carrying across the misty shoreline. "Of course she does. Let me guess. Something enormous and unruly?" "A Bernese mountain dog specifically." "She's been researching. Apparently they're good with water, which she finds critical for our lifestyle." The easy domesticity of the conversation wrapped around them like a comfortable blanket. They had found their rhythm in this blended existence. Weekdays in town, where Lila could manage her company remotely and Emma could attend school. Weekends at the lake cabin, disconnected from technology and reconnected with each other. The rain intensified, but none of them moved to seek shelter. Instead, Emma twirled with her face upturned to the sky, while Caleb and Lila watched, their shoulders touching in quiet companionship. "You know," Lila said softly, "a year ago, I would have been horrified at the thought of standing in the rain, getting my clothes wet, with no schedule or plan." "And now?" Caleb asked, though he already knew the answer. "Now I understand what I was really running from that night. Not just James, or the merger, or my father's manipulations. I was running from a life where everything looked perfect on the surface, but nothing felt true underneath." She squeezed his hand. "I ran away from a wedding where I was just playing a part, and somehow found my way home instead." As Emma rushed back to them, breathless with excitement over a perfect sand dollar she'd discovered, Lila reflected on the strange and winding path that had led her here. The woman who had fled down a rain-soaked road in a ruined wedding gown couldn't have imagined this future. Not the foundation, not the balance she'd struck between her corporate responsibilities and personal fulfillment, and certainly not this unconventional family that had formed from the broken pieces of different lives. The rain continued to fall around them, no longer a symbol of escape and desperation, but of cleansing and renewal, washing away pretense to reveal the authentic lives beneath. Together they turned toward home, a runaway bride who had finally stopped running, a single father who had opened his heart again, and a little girl who had somehow known all along that sometimes family is what you find when you're not looking for it.